The tank in the back of Boyd Kessler's truck held 500 chicks, and every single one of them was a reject. Crooked toes, splayed legs, a scatter of pasty-bottomed stragglers, too small for the broiler contract that had already rejected them once. Dell Faircloth stood in the gravel lot of Kessler Feed and Seed in Loyals Fork, Kentucky, and bought the whole lot for 11 cents a head. Hit that like button. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from tonight. Now, let's begin. Odalys Dell Faircloth was 41 years old, and until 14 months earlier, she had never kept a chicken in her life. She'd spent the better part of 2 decades doing claims work for an insurance office in Lexington, driving 2 hours home on weekends to sit with her grandmother, Ruth Ann, in the front room of the farmhouse on Sourwood Ridge, drinking the same chicory coffee Ruth Ann had made since before Dell was born. When Ruth Ann died that February, in her sleep, in the same iron bed she'd slept in for 61 years, she left Dell 41 acres, a leaning tobacco barn converted to a hen house nobody had used since the Reagan administration, and a debt on the equipment shed that the bank wanted settled by fall. Dell quit the insurance job in April, gave notice on a Tuesday, and drove down to Sourwood Ridge with her car packed tight enough that the trunk wouldn't latch. She told people she was going to raise pastured eggs, a modest, forgivable ambition that nobody in Loyals Fork thought twice about. She told no one the real reason, because she didn't fully understand it herself yet, only that some nights she'd sit up at the kitchen table reading her grandmother's old canning room shelf of farm bulletins by lamplight, and one phrase kept circling back to her, underlined twice in pencil, pressed so hard the paper had nearly torn. 13 years, and they will come up hungry. Ruth Ann had kept that line marked for 40 years and never once explained it to a living soul. Dell had asked her about it as a girl, tracing the pencil groove with one finger. Ruth Ann had only said, "Not yet, you'll know when," and gone back to shelling beans, like the question had never been asked. The tin box was wedged behind a loose board in the smokehouse, and Dell only found it because a groundhog had rooted out the dirt beneath it that spring. She had to pry the lid with a flathead screwdriver, the hinges gone to rust, and the smell that came up when it finally gave was cedar and old newsprint. Inside, wrapped in a feed sack gone stiff with age, was a 1954 county extension pamphlet titled "Pastured Poultry as a Control Measure for Periodical Brood Emergence," its margins crowded corner to corner with her grandmother's handwriting in 3 different inks, added to over 3 different decades. The pamphlet explained what old-timers on Sourwood Ridge had known and mostly forgotten, that a particular brood of periodical cicadas surfaced across 3 counties every 13 years, in numbers thick enough to strip young orchards and garden rows bare within a week of emergence, and that farms which kept large, mobile flocks of foraging poultry moving ahead of the emergence line lost almost nothing, while their neighbors lost everything. Ruth Ann's own notes, dated across the 3 different broods she'd lived through, tracked bird counts against acres protected in a hand that grew shakier with each entry. The math in the margins was blunt. It took roughly 10 birds an acre, moved daily, ahead of the line, to keep a field clear. Dell sat at the kitchen table until past midnight doing the arithmetic on the back of a feed receipt. 41 acres. The brood, by the Extension Service's own charts and her grandmother's own count, was due back this June. Boyd Kessler had sold her the culls as a favor, and he told her plainly what he thought of the deal. Straight-run leftovers with pasty butt and crooked toes. "That's not a flock, ma'am. That's a funeral," he said, counting out her change at the register while the tank of cheeping chicks rattled behind them. He wasn't cruel about it. He'd buried enough of his own weak chicks over 30 years behind the counter to know the odds better than most anyone in the county. When word got around Loyal's Fork that the insurance woman was nursing 500 rejected chicks under heat lamps in a converted tobacco barn, the talk wasn't kind, but it wasn't wrong either. By the second week she'd lost 61 birds to a cold snap the brooder heaters barely survived, and she'd sat up 3 nights running, moving the weakest of them into a laundry basket by the wood stove. Her neighbor Wade Pruitt, who ran the co-op gas station, told anyone who'd listen over the pump that that girl's spending her granny's land money on a compost pile with feathers, and the line got enough laughs that it made its way back to Dell twice before June. Even the county extension office, when she called to ask about brood cycles, put her through to a recording. Dell said nothing back to any of it. She didn't explain the pamphlet, the brood charts, the 13 years. She kept the tin box locked in the trunk of her car and answered every question about her plans with some version of, "We'll see." Her log, kept in a marbled composition book on the kitchen table, ran the whole spring in dated entries. April 9th, 439 of 500, confirmed alive. Culled 4, with leg splay past saving. Started electrolytes in the water for the small ones. April 22, moved first group to pasture pens. 61 lost total since April 1st, holding steady now. May 3, 402 birds. Average weight up. Wade asked if I was building a petting zoo. Told him no. May 14th, fence line moved to the north 40. Soil under old pen scratched down to bare dirt, working as Ruth Ann's notes said it would. May 30, 391 birds moved to garden border, 10 per acre like the pamphlet said. Found first cicada nymph shell under the fence line this morning. Early, June 6th. Full emergence starting east side, near Kessler's own orchard. Moved all pens overnight, no sleep. June 9, 384. Birds on the line now, eating as fast as the ground gives them up. Corn rows behind them look clean. Wade's rows 2 fields over do not. By the second week of June, the brood was fully up across Loyal's Fork. A droning, rust-colored crawl of insects, thick enough to bow young branches under their weight. Wade Pruitt's sweet corn was stripped to stalks in 4 days. The Hensley orchard 2 miles east lost most of its new growth, but behind Dell's moving pens, the cicadas simply didn't get the chance to settle. 384 birds working a rotating line ate them by the thousands before they could climb high enough to lay. Boyd Kessler drove out on the 9th day of full emergence, stood at Dell's fence line, and put his hand flat against a fence post in a field of standing, undamaged corn, while cicadas roared in every direction but that one. He didn't say much. "Well," he said, quiet, mostly to himself, "I sold you a funeral and you built an ark." A week later, the regional extension agent, Marta Colon, walked the same fence line with a clipboard, tested Dell's soil and yield against 3 neighboring farms, and certified the pasture rotation method for a small farm cooperative contract, the first commercial validation the old pamphlet's numbers had ever gotten in 70 years. By August, Dell's niece, 12-year-old Junie Pruitt, had her own composition book going, dated entries and all, and Dell had started transcribing Ruth Ann's old pamphlet into something that could survive another 13 years without a groundhog's help. If this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who's been told their plans don't add up. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever kept faith with something nobody else could see the sense in, I want to hear about it. Every comment gets read.